Hello class, and welcome back to EDUC 1300. In our last lesson, we discussed the culture of higher education, and we discussed 12 customs that you should be familiar with to be successful in college. In that lesson, we primarily covered the surface culture of higher education. However, in this lesson, we will dive deeper into the deep culture of higher education and talk about some of the norms and beliefs of your instructors. By studying these beliefs, my hope is that you will become better familiar with the expectations of your instructors and have a better grasp of the deep culture of higher education. So let's begin. First, college educators expect students to be responsible for their education. Therefore, they do not like to see students blame their poor performance on anything else but themselves. We'll talk about this in future lessons, but this is one of the main pet peeves of college educators. Each semester, we see students who fail to meet the expectations of a class, then blame everyone else for their failures. However, there are several students who slack off and do not pay attention in class, or do not complete assignments, or they come unprepared for class after an absence, or ask, "What did I miss?" In both of these instances, the students would have been ready for class had they taken a look at their course calendar or taken the initiative to contact a classmate to see what they missed. Finally, a lot of students believe that whatever is wrong is not their fault, and they whine rather than address their problems. Secondly, educators expect students to be highly motivated to succeed. However, they witness students who expect their instructors to motivate them, have an apathetic or a "I don't care" attitude in their course. Then when they do, they don't care and they think they can make up work, submit assignments after deadlines, or rewrite assignments for better grades. As an instructor, I can tell you that it's not uncommon for instructors to be flooded with phone calls and emails from students the last week of school asking for special accommodations to get assignments submitted or asking for extra credit. However, most of the students asking for those accommodations have done very little the whole semester. They try, unsuccessfully, to salvage their grade at the last minute. Not only is this goal unrealistic, but it is extremely aggravating to teachers who've provided 15 weeks of instruction and are now trying to wrap up their semesters and submit grades for their other students. Occasionally, we'll see students who express everything is boring. Also, we'll see students who've done poorly on assignments but lack interest in improvement after extensive feedback from their instructor. And then finally, many students assume that the professor can make everything meaningful, and if not, then they do not complete assignments because they're just not interested. Although we do everything possible to make the material engaging and meaningful, there are times when students will have to drudge through material they may find boring. In those instances, a successful student realizes he or she needs to know this information or the instructor wouldn't have covered it. Therefore, they find motivation to continue in spite of the subject material or delivery. Third, educators expect students to attend class regularly and complete all of their assignments to the best of their ability. However, many students fall behind or do little work, but they still expect to make good grades. They feel entitled and they think they can do whatever they want because they paid for this class. Or they believe they can avoid subject material that may be too difficult or time-consuming to understand. When they avoid the difficult material, they then think it's the instructor's job to catch them up if they miss class. Also, they often arrive late to class, or not at all, then do not complete assignments. Then they think they'll get credit for seat time. Simply put, there are academic standards that instructors live by, and we expect our students to want to learn the material. When a student does not complete his or her work, or believes he or she should get a good grade simply by showing up, it annoys us. Showing up is important to college success. However, actively participating is also required. Fourth, educators expect students to collaborate with their peers and make use of available resources to succeed. But many students believe, I can do this all on my own, and they forego utilizing college resources. And when they struggle with something, they neglect to ask for help. They also fail to connect with others to study. Then they do not ask questions when they're confused and only say something after it's too late. Then they believe they can't learn anything by working in groups, and they wait until the last week of the semester to flood tutoring centers. Part of being successful in college is learning to network with your college peers and your instructors. You share similar experiences, and the friendships and relationships you develop in college can be beneficial in your future career. Therefore, if you're not reaching out to those students around you, whether it's the students in your class or the faculty and staff here to help you, then you're missing out on the full college experience. Next, educators expect students to change when what they are doing is not working. However, many students think that what worked in high school will continue to work in college. However, there are a lot of differences between high school and college. Your textbook does a good job of defining those differences, so I will not go into those in detail. But a successful college student realizes that sometimes a different approach is needed. Therefore, the strategies that worked in high school may not be effective in college. Also, students develop bad habits that distract from their main goal. We've talked about how working too many hours or having too much debt can distract from your academic goals. But what are the other distractions that can get you off course towards your goals? Part of being successful in college is knowing when you're off course, so you can look for ways to change. However, many students are unable to see different choices or are unwilling to make changes, and then they do not address the negative issues that are holding them back. Instead, they focus on their weaknesses rather than their strengths, and they ignore feedback and constructive criticism, which ultimately causes them to repeat ineffective behaviors. Next, educators expect students to demonstrate a passion for learning, but students expect to walk into the class, flip open the top of their heads, and have the teacher pour in the necessary knowledge. Furthermore, many students believe everyone is entitled to their opinion, so they don't care to form one. Therefore, they don't engage in discussions or debates that could further their learning or challenge their own beliefs. Additionally, some students don't understand the importance of an education and take financial aid and other resources for granted. They cheat or plagiarize to cut corners, when such an error only shows the instructor that the student doesn't care enough to learn the material, nor does the student want to put forth the effort to succeed in the instructor's class. It also shows the instructor that the student is making grades their top priority rather than taking a genuine interest in learning. Finally, some students do not buy or read the textbook because they assume the teacher will tell them everything they need to know. College educators have spent a lot of time studying in their field. In addition to their bachelor's degrees, most college educators have completed a master's degree in a certain discipline. Some have completed doctorate degrees. Therefore, they are serious about their subject matter. They expect their students to share in their passion. But many students demonstrate actions like those listed above, and an educator quickly realizes that a student's intentions are not sincere. Next, educators expect students to manage their emotions, as well as the emotions of others, in the service of their goals. However, many students let fear guide their decisions. They're judgmental and hurtful to other students because they're different from them. They communicate inappropriately with their instructors. They lack the grit when things get tough, or lack grit when the going gets tough. Also, they choose short-term gratification over their long-term goals. We'll talk more about that in future lessons. Also, students do not speak in class for fear of criticism or judgment. And finally, they're just openly rude. We'll talk about all of this in future lessons, but managing one's emotions and managing the emotions in others is crucial to our success. Finally, educators expect students to have a realistic self-confidence about themselves and their ability to succeed in college. But many students pretend they know it all, and then they quit when they encounter challenges. And they are unwilling to struggle with learning. They don't understand what it means to work to learn. So when the going gets tough, they're often ready to drop the class or remove themselves from the situation. Often this is because they have little belief in themselves. So every setback becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Still other students talk about how they will never succeed in college, while others talk big but give up easily. As we move through this course, we'll talk more about these educator expectations, and we'll discuss ways for you to address any issues if your actions are contrary to these expectations. Remember, part of being successful in college is determining when you're off course and making appropriate changes. So, goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next lesson.